Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Today, in celebration of National Season and the upcoming Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, we'll be looking at some of the most powerful and feared decks the game has ever seen. If you want to be the best, you have to exemplify greatness, consistency, and strength, among other things, and it's qualities like those that take great decks into all-timers. So today we honor only the best of the best in a video that will be aptly named the top 10 best decks of all time, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Hierarchy. Now, we've set some criteria, and we won't just be looking at powerful decks, but one so powerful that they literally shaped entire formats and the Forbidden and Limited list itself. We'll also be considering how powerful the deck was relative to the time of its era or prime, and not by today's standards, because that of course wouldn't be fair. We'll also be basing this list strictly on the TCG meta. As of recent years, we've gotten separate ban lists and different meta games. And lastly, we will not be considering any FTK or OTK only decks, as those should be categorized differently, and that is a list for another day. Without further ado, let's begin. Number 10, Blackwings. We start off our list with the strongest archetype of the entire 5Ds era. Blackwings weren't just well accomplished at this time, winning multiple Shonen Jump championships, but they were one of the best decks ever when it came to offense and defense, with cards like Kalute and NEKROZ attack that could serve both purposes. In addition, Blackwings also had one of the best +1 searching engines in the entire game, and a card like Black Whirlwind that could pretty much dig for any tool that you needed to handle any situation. Opening with multiples of this almost always spelled doom for your opponent. Number 9, Perfect Circle Monarchs. Monarchs have had a competitive presence in Yu-Gi-Oh! For about a decade now, and out of all the variants, in my opinion, this was the scariest. Mixing in Elemental Hell Stratos with the Destiny engine gave the already powerful Monarchs the extreme speed they needed to tower over nearly everything else in the game. Destiny Draw and Destiny Commander draws off of Call to Haunted and Premature Burial gave you the ability to blaze through your deck, while cards like Destiny Hero Malicious gave you constant tribute fodder for the Monarchs. If it wasn't bad enough, with the release of RAIZA the Storm Monarch and Force of the Breaker, combined with Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, the deck actually became well known for spinning sometimes multiple cards on the top of their opponent's deck, thus was deemed the dreaded RAIZA lock. Number 8, Prophecy. One half of the delinquent duo that reigned over the now infamous Spellbook Dragon Ruler format, Prophecy post-Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy was one of the best controlled decks ever. Spellbook of Fate was unlimited, and to this day is still one of the game's top two-way cards. Jogan the Spiritualist gave you complete lockdown and was searchable straight from the deck, which is insane, as was the fact that Spellbook Grand Tower generally gave Prophecy the ability to draw 2 cards per turn and not 1. Lastly, there was Spellbook of Judgments, and I mean, I could go into all the reasons why this card made the deck potent, but that would just be an entire video itself. Number 7, Plant Synchro, an adaptive little beast that got every ounce of potential from the Synchro mechanic. That's probably the best way to describe Plant Synchro in a nutshell. The earliest builds were based more around Dandelion and Drill Warrior, and its constant use of the tokens for everything from Monarch and Light and Darkness summons to your basic Synchro plays. But as Konami released better plant tuners in the later half of the 5Ds era, such as Glow Up Bulb and Spore that could be summoned straight from the deck with Lonefire Blossom, the deck's identity completely changed, and it became one of the game's best hyper synchro decks that could summon everything from the low level formula Synchrons to the giant behemoths of Shooting Star Dragon and Trishula. Number 6, Cookie Cutter Control. This is one that a lot of newer players may be unfamiliar with, and it's largely because during the time of this deck's height, which spanned the late days of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Series to the beginning of GX, nearly every deck made could fall into this category. See, Cookie Cutter was before Yu-Gi-Oh! Became such an archetype focused game, and largely meant a deck with a ton of good cards and staples in it. All the broken cards like Delinquent Duo, Snatch Steal, Spirit Reaper, etc. that were left over from GOAT format thrown together in a deck with other really good cards in the meta. All in all, Cookie Cutter Control may have been an amazing deck, but it really doesn't have an identity of its own. Number 5, NEKROZ. In my opinion, the second most consistent deck of all time, NEKROZ was a ritual deck designed by Konami specifically to do one thing: destroy and punish players who relied on their extra deck. This is seen quite evidently in the design of cards like NEKROZ of Unicorn, Brionic, Colossalus. NEKROZ was a deck that didn't just lock people out of their extra deck, it locked them out of special summoning completely with the Gen Lock. What's more absurd than that was the fact that even though NEKROZ didn't run any traps, it was nearly impossible to OTK, even when it didn't have any cards on the field, thanks to cards like the NEKROZ of Valkyris. This is also the only deck in the game's history that really didn't have to fear when it didn't have any ritual cards on the field or in its hand, because they could just banish them from the graveyard to add new ones from the deck. Number 4, Gladiator Beast. Because of cards legal at the time, things like Cold Wave, Giant Grenade, Heavy Storm, combined with Gladiator Beast, Bestiari, and Grazaris, Glad Beasts are really the most spell and trap suppressive deck ever. The GX era was largely filled with fusion decks such as Elemental Heroes, Cyberdarks, and Roids that used way too many cards to summon below average fusions with minimal impact. That was until the release of Gladiator Beasts and their Contact Fusion. This not only saved you from having to run Polymerization completely, but it also gave you access to Gladiator Beast Grazaris, a card that can nuke entire boards, then tag out into 2 other monsters that could provide you with even more advantage. Because Glads had what seemed like an infinite amount of back row hate, cards that were super powerful at the time in trap form, things like Royal Oppression and Solemn Judgment, they did absolutely nothing to slow this deck down. Number 3, Dragon Rulers. The other half of the Spellbook ruler format, Dragon Rulers are probably the strongest archetype of all time, and when you really go back and look at those deck lists of full power Dragon Rulers, it was absurd how good the deck was from basically every angle. Speed with Super Rejuvenation and Sacred Sword, insane field presence with turn 1 Draco Sacks or Light and Darkness plays, and the ability to floodgate just about every other deck right out of the door. I'm looking at you, Skill Drain and Vanity's Emptiness. Also, because of the nature of the Dragon Rulers and Return to the Different Dimension, their grind game was actually exceptional for a deck with such potent offense. Number 2, Performages and Pals. Full disclosure, had there never been the February emergency ban list this year, there is no doubt in my mind that this would have been the number 1 deck on this list. This is, in my opinion, the single most consistent and powerful deck ever, not including FTKs of course, but the lifespan of Performages and Pals was only a mere month, and we never got a chance to see if other meta decks would have found a way to counter the deck, or at least put a dent in its dominance. Honestly, my opinion has changed since earlier this year, and I think the answer would have been emphatically no. I think that Performages and Pals could make some of the strongest boards that the game has ever seen turn 1, and the deck was 100% not a glass cannon unlike some of its descendants. Thanks to cards like Plushfire and Luster Pendulum, the deck's grind game was excellent, even after the turn 1 onslaught. Honorable mentions include Gateway Samurai, Wind-Ups, Burning Abyss, Chaos Return, and Hand Control. And finally, to our number 1, Teledad. I rank Teledad number 1 because when you combine its overall dominance, power, and consistency, I think it just flat out merits it. Way before full power, Performages and Pals was taking 90% plus top spots at the YCS level, Teledad was basically doing the same thing, only 2 shonen jumps into its lifespan. The deck was super fast because of the draw support provided in Phantom Darkness combined with the Destiny engine. It could OTK at a moment's notice, and it was basically the only deck in the game that could survive Crush Card Virus. When you have an entire format named after you, you're doing something right. So let me know how I did on this list. What do you think is the best deck of all time? Leave that in the comment section below, and thank you for watching as always. Subscribing makes life happy.